This is an introduction to Palette Expense. Palette Expense is a part of the Palette Arena family. There are different types of expenses in an organization. It might be that the employee is paying for a hotel with his own card or cash. It can also be that he have a credit card provided by the company where he is responsible to pay the credit card invoice himself. Or it can be that he's using a corporate company card. And based on the process also in Palette Expense will differ from time to time. There are a lot of challenges around the expense reporting process. A receipt is a legal document that we need to store, and receipts are misplaced, especially if they are on paper. In the organization, it is often that people lack in knowledge about how to do a report. What limits do we have? Do we have a policy? What rules do apply for this type of expense? And so on. It can also be very hard to find information, both for me as an employee, once again, how to do what to do, how to do the booking and so on, but also for finance to follow up on costs. Who needs to approve this type of expense? That's quite often a question. We have quite clear rules when it comes to cost generated by an invoice, but it is not as common that you have an approval process in place for expenses in the same way. And it is more or less the same type of cost. If you do your expense reports on paper, it's also very easy for those papers to get lost. And also when it comes to receipts, quite often when accounts payable or HR actually do get the expense report on their table, there are a lot of receipts missing. And it's also very hard to follow the process, both for me as a user and for accounts payable. So let's see what Palette Expense can do to support this process. Well, we have an employee here who has been on a trip, and now we have some expenses to report. So what he can do is to take a photo of the receipt and send that into the Palette Expense system. When he is at the office or at the hotel, he logs in to Palette Expense and create an expense report. He will then direct see what rules and policies that applies for that specific type of expense. If he did use a credit card provided by the company, private or corporate, he can then connect the receipt to the credit card transaction that has been imported to Palette Arena from the bank or the card company. And Palette will then generate a workflow based on who is creating the expense report and what type of expense it is. And the report is sent automatically out for approval. After approval, the report will be sent to accounts payable or HR system automatically, and a payment will be done to the employee, as long as it's not a corporate card, of course, because then it will stay within the solution. If we have used a corporate company card, where we in next step will get an invoice from, let's say, Eurocard, then it's possible to match those incoming invoices against the expense report. And that will also help out with accounts payable when it comes to handling of Eurocard invoices. In Palette Expense, there are some integrations that might be needed. But it is also possible to run Palette Expense without any integrations. One integration that we often have is the financial integration, to send booking data into the financial system. And here we quite often reuse the integration that the customer already is having in place for invoices. Another type of integration is that we can also import the receipts. So when the employee is taking a photo of the receipt and send that into Palette Expense, then we have a capture function that will place the receipt in the correct user's capture box, so they can use that when doing their expense reports. Another type of integration is the import of the card transactions. So what we do here is that we can get the transaction file from the bank or the card company, and we can use that information when we are creating our expense report. And we will look a little bit more into that. This is the integration of credit card transactions. Whenever I'm using my credit card, corporate or private company card, a transaction will be created, and that will be sent into our system, and then we will connect that transaction to a registered credit card within our system. And then when I go in and create my expense report, I can use those transactions to make the expense report easier. And then the invoice will come from the card company, and either I or the company will pay that depending on what type of card it is. So that's a little bit about what Palette Expense is and the challenges that the company could have. And now I'm going to show you a demo of Palette Expense. I'm Frank and I've been on a trip to Malmö, and I will now create my expense report. So I say create new expense, and what I have to do first is to add on some header information. So like the purpose of the trip or this expense. Trip to Malmö, visit customer A. I can add on a from date, a to date, and some header information. And then it's time to create my expense lines. And we have the expense lines here. Now we don't have any. So I can do it in two different ways. Either I first go to receipts, and I will then find the receipts that I have sent into the system by taking a photo of them with my mobile phone. And I will take the air shuttle. And then I can see my receipt like this. And I have the amount and everything that I need to create this expense report. I can then select an expense type. And based on the expense type, the system will then provide me with a policy and some rules around that specific expense report. And then I can put in the price. I can put in a description. Train to airport. And so on. And I add this. I could also do it another way. I could go in here, if we go again, add receipt, take the same. But instead of filling in all the information, because I did in this specific case, I did use a company card. And then I can search for the card transactions that are connected to me as the person. And then I take the air shuttle to the airport. And then I get all the information from the receipt. And I just add this. So like this, I just add on until I don't have any more receipts or credit card transactions to report. What Palette will do as well is to create then a workflow, a flow that will be built up automatically based on who is creating the expense report, and that's me. It will then add on my manager, and it might be that we also need to add on more people depending on the customer's authorization rules and what type of expense this is. I could also add on a comment that could be internally, so my manager knows why I was going on this trip. And so visit to customer A in Malmö. I could also have an attachment, maybe some extra information that would be good to save with this expense report. The next step will be that my manager will log in to the system. Johan is the consultant manager, and he can now see that he has 2 expense reports that needs to be approved. He goes in here, and here's the one that we just created. He can review the lines to see what information has been added, and when he's satisfied, everything looks okay, then he can approve. He could also reject, but for now let's approve. Depending on what type of expense this was, that will then be sent into either the AP system and be paid out to me, or as in this specific case, this was actually paid with a corporate company card. So the next step in this process is that the company will get an invoice from the card company. So let's look at that process. The next step will be that an invoice will come into the company. And here we can see with accounts payable that we have an invoice from Eurocard. I will not now go so much deeper into the invoice process, but just by looking at this, we can see that there are 3 lines on this invoice. And because of that, we should have 3 expense lines already approved within Palette Expense. So let's go to the expense reports. Palette have now identified that 2 lines could be matched. We have already approved expense reports for the hotel and for the air shuttle. But the 3rd line, the hotel, has not yet been reported, so that we cannot match to the invoice. But if I save and copy the account posting, then what we will get is cost account and the cost center from the expense report, and also the approval that was made by the consult manager Johan. So that will minimize the work for accounts payable when they work with the Eurocard invoices. So that was a short introduction to Palette Expense and what we can do in here. So depending on what type of expenses the customer will have, we will set up different rules and different integrations and setups for Palette Expense. But you can learn much more about that in the Palette Academy training for Palette Expense. Thank you.